I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that has been here for all 3 days of the symposium. We are so happy to have CASETA here at the Witte. We love to have people who are passionate about the same things that we're passionate about. And it really warms our hearts to have a lot of like-minded individuals coming here this weekend. So thank you. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the Witte Museum's early curators and her legacy and how it impacts Texas art. As curator of art at the Witte Museum from 1927 to 1958, Eleanor Onderdonk was instrumental in shaping the collections of the Witte Museum and leaving a lasting legacy in both San Antonio and throughout art education and exhibition in the state of Texas. Eleanor was an active correspondent, diarist, and record keeper, leaving behind a rich record, providing insight to her remarkable life and career. Cecilia Steinfeld was the first person to explore the life and work of Eleanor Onderdonk in the 1975 exhibition catalog, The Onderdonks, A Family of Painters. Steinfeld's biographical narrative included her life and history, punctuated by Onderdonk's own words. While Steinfeld addresses Onderdonk's artistic merits and provides highlights of the exhibition throughout her 31-year museum career, I wanted to see if we could learn more about her understanding as a role of curator and the development of the Witte Museum's collections, as a proponent for art education and as a champion for Texas artists. So to better understand Onderdonk, we need to understand who she was as an artist. She was born in 1884. The second of 3 children to Robert and Emily Onderdonk. She grew up in a very close-knit family surrounded by art. She had art instruction at home and in school, but it does not appear that she actively pursued her art until she was in her late 20s. In 1909, we find mentions in her diary and in her correspondence that she has started to paint and sketch all day. This is also a significant year because it's the same year that her brother returns from New York with his family. So these are some of her sketches and paintings that we have here in the collection. In 1912, Eleanor entered a series of her miniatures in an art league exhibition here in San Antonio. They were newly formed, and her father was one of the organizers of the local art league. The success of this exhibition led her to enroll in the Art Students League in 1913. This was the same school where both her father and her brother had studied before her. Now, while she's in New York, she studies miniature paintings. These are some examples in our collection. When she returns to San Antonio after completing her education in New York, the San Antonio newspaper did a full-page spread dedicated to her return. They noted that she was gifted with color sense, which is as rare as it is beautiful. She's able to bring to each portrait the colors and tones which show to the best advantage the flesh of the subject and make a jewel-like iridescence where the surface is not surface, but the depth of luster of a well-done miniature done by a skilled craftsman. A fine knowledge and a fine understanding. It will be no surprise to find her name listed at an early age among America's greatest artists. So shortly after this, Eleanor's life changes dramatically. Her father passes away in 1917. And while she had been taking students since her return from New York, she now inherited all of her father's students. Now, she did not particularly like teaching, but it was a means to an end. And she taught both in the family home, at the Bon Vivant School here in San Antonio, and St. Mary's Hall. Now, she continued to teach actively until 1927, when she replaced Sybil Brown as the curator of art here at the Witte Museum. In those days, the museum staff were city employees. The San Antonio Art League established the schedule of exhibitions and covered loan fees and the cost of guest lecturers. The museum covered the transportation costs for the exhibitions and the insurance, as well as her salary. Eleanor worked closely with Ethel Drought, the head of the San Antonio Art League. Both women were forces of nature and worked very well together and maintained a close relationship throughout their lives. Her relationship with subsequent presidents of the San Antonio Art League varied through the years, but more or less, many of them were content to follow Eleanor's leads on her exhibitions. Now, Eleanor took to her job quite naturally here at the Witte, and shortly after starting, she wrote a letter to her friend in Mexico, remarking that this job keeps me pretty busy. I'm working from morning till night, and when I get through, I don't seem to have accomplished much. There's more to do here than one would think, and at the same time, you have to be hostess, General Information Bureau, answer the phone 1,000,000 times a day, and write letters, which is slow for me because I don't seem to acquire much speed on the typewriter. And for any of you who are still out there working in museums or galleries, you know that this is still the same today. In her first year at the Witte, Eleanor assisted with the Edgar B. Davis competitive competition and organized exhibitions of local artists Dawson Watson and Nicholas Brewer. But in this very first year, she faced a challenge that many curators would continue to cringe at today. So in 1927, the Art League sponsored an exhibition of more than 200 works from Mexico to come to San Antonio. They were paintings, drawings, and sketches by Diego Rivera, Jean Carlo, and Maximo Pacheco. We don't know much about the exhibition, but we can glean information from the local newspaper articles at the time. And as you will see here, valuable art collection is said missing. It was one that I had some fun looking up. Eleanor's notes always called it the Rivera exhibition in 1927. We had no object list. We had no idea which paintings were here. So we're extrapolating from the news reports. But it says that here, lost somewhere between Mexico City and San Antonio, a valuable art collection of more than 200 original paintings, sketches, and drawings, the work of Rivera, a noted Mexican artist, and several others of that country. The collection was started for San Antonio from Mexico City, September 20th, and no trace can be found of it. Valued at thousands of dollars, the artwork was to have been displayed at the Witte Memorial Museum late in September. A tracer sent out by the customs officials has failed to locate the shipment, and concern has been expressed that the collection might have been damaged or entirely lost. So you can imagine that must have been an absolute nightmare. Now, Rivera had some name recognition in the United States, but he hadn't reached sort of popular household name status quite yet. When Eleanor had the good fortune to actually establish the exhibit in November of that year, the local people of San Antonio did not respond very favorably. They thought that the exhibit was not very pretty, and they expressed their dislike decidedly and audibly. Eleanor was quite disappointed, but the one bright spot was the work of Emily Edwards, a local San Antonio artist who had been studying in Mexico for the past year. And so you'll see here the note from the San Antonio Light saying that by far the most delightful feature of the exhibition is a group of exquisite tinted woodcuts and watercolors by Emily Edwards, an artist who spent the last year painting with Rivera Group. Now, this did not stop Eleanor from being a champion for exhibits that did not go over very well in San Antonio. She felt that everyone here needed to be exposed to the great works as they should. So following the Rivera exhibit, in September of 29, the newspapers announced that San Antonio is scheduled to be startled into consciousness with a selection of postmodern French painters. And you can see one example of the works that was in this collection. It is now at the Museum of Modern Art. It included works by Dufy, André Lotte, Pablo Picasso, and André Derain. Once again, this was popularly panned by the citizens of San Antonio, yet Eleanor persisted, and throughout her career, she was an advocate for both American and international works that challenged the sensibilities of the people of San Antonio. In this particular exhibition, she was a bit aghast that they were described as grotesque, bizarre, fantastic, and at times insane. But as Eleanor continued to work with the Art League to present these exhibitions, they were augmented by a series of lecturers. They brought in curators, art critics, and historians from across the country to supplement this, hoping perhaps to generate a better understanding of art within the community. Now, something that went over far better in San Antonio were our local competitive art exhibitions. And this was something that Eleanor took over the operation of in 1930. The competitive exhibition would receive over 100 entries in the early years, and artists such as Dawson Watson, Jose Arpa, Clara Pancoast, Rolla Taylor, Eloise Polk McGill, Robert Wood were regular participants in the early years, and new names were added each year. And Eleanor had the enviable job of going through all of the recipient entries and helping work with the jury to select the works for that year. It was a similar role to what she did with the Texas General Exhibitions. In 1932, she joined Jerry Brywaters and James Chilman working on the annual exhibitions. They started in Dallas with the Texas State Fair and then traveled to Houston and San Antonio. We were often the last venue in that circle. And as the years went by, Eleanor took a larger and larger role in the jury and judgment of the pieces that are being included, and she was the one to award the awards to the San Antonio artists that were included. It also seems natural that Eleanor participated in exhibitions that were sent to the Texas State Fair. Both her brother and her father had selected works to be displayed at the Texas Fair over the years. In 1952, she was honored by her peers for her decades of work with the general exhibitions. She writes in her diary that it seems that Jerry Bywaters and Jimmy Chilman of the Houston Museum decided in my old age they would accord me the honors that would do me no good when I was dead. At least I guess that's what they thought. I knew I was going to have to award prizes to those that came from San Antonio, but I certainly didn't know that they were going to eulogize me. Jerry got up and said they wanted to honor a woman who had done so much for art in Texas, Miss Eleanor Onderdonk. Then they read a lot of telegrams from friends in New Mexico and San Antonio, and I practically died on the spot. They then presented me with a silver cup made by Dallas craftsmen, all engraved and everything. It is Eleanor's work on these juried state and local exhibitions throughout her career where her legacy outside of the Witte Museum is felt in Texas art. Her careful eye and considered judgment helped select the artists who represented the best from the state of Texas. It is in this area in particular where there is more research to be done. Within our records, we have the entrance to some of these exhibitions, who made the cut and who didn't. And that can be very informative to us over the years as we look to understand how we were defining Texas art at the time. Now, working on these exhibitions, Eleanor was careful to look for new talents. And she always kept an eye out for young artists who could be given their first one-man show. Artists like Julius Waltz, Cecilia Newheisel-Steinfeld, Alfredo Guerra, Octavio Medellin, and Minette Teichmuller. And here we have on the left a work by Minette Teichmuller. She and her husband Hugo Pohl took over the art colony in Leon Springs, just outside of San Antonio, after Peter Homestead had his stroke. And then on the left, we have a work by Cecilia Steinfeld. This is one of her watercolors. As she neared the end of her career, Eleanor reflected on the ever-increasing number of exhibitions from artists of the region, noting that it showed great progress. She writes that in the past, there would not have been possible to assemble the many shows of museum quality from Texas. It is fast becoming a strong factor in art and is so being recognized throughout the United States. Now, in addition to Eleanor's work with the exhibitions, what is of key interest to us here at the Witte Museum is how she helped craft our collection. When the Witte Museum was founded, we received a bequest from Alfred Witte. And part of his bequest was to leave $65,000 to establish a museum in Brackenridge Park, and an additional $10,000 was set aside for the acquisition of works for the collection. The very first purchases that Eleanor made for the museum from these funds were purchases from the artist families. As an artist and the child of an artist, Eleanor had a unique position of being able to communicate with families about why the museum would be an appropriate home for their loved ones' works. And she was also able to handle the delicate negotiations of families that were forced to sell their works during the lean years of the Depression. In 1934, Eleanor purchased 4 works by Seth Eastman. Here we see his watercolor of the Alamo and his painting of Mission San Jose. All 4 were completed in Texas while he was stationed near San Antonio. This was followed quickly by the acquisition of Market Plaza, which was purchased from Thomas Allen's daughter in 1936. It was displayed in an exhibition for the Texas Centennial here at the Witte Museum, and Eleanor's father painted a remarkably similar scene to Allen's Market Plaza. In 1937 and 1945, multiple works by Theodore Gentil were purchased from the artist family and local collectors. Among them are Oxcart Leaving Town, Tamale Vendor, Mexican Market Day, Coahuila, Mexico, and On the Trail. Many of these paintings are on display now in our Confluence and Culture exhibition. I encourage you to please take a moment to go see that before you leave. Now, one of the most important purchases that Eleanor made for the collection was in 1938. It was both a high point for her professionally as well as personally. In 1938, the Witte Museum was able to purchase the last work completed by her brother, Eleanor Onderdonk. Shortly after his death, Lucy Tobin Thornton, Mrs. J.H. Frost, Mrs. J.K. Beretta, and Ellen Schultz Quillen began a campaign to raise $10,000 to purchase the painting. It took 16 years and many small donations from the people of San Antonio to complete the purchase. The money went to Julian's wife and children. Eleanor was instrumental in being the caretaker of both her father and her brother's legacy, and it is in part thanks to her that the many records of the Onderdonk family of their works and their legacy were saved. She spent many years authenticating many paintings for people and collectors throughout the Texas community. In addition to the purchases that Eleanor made for the collection, there were numerous donations that came in these early years. Key paintings in the Witte's collection include Karl Ivansky, Terry Rangers, that was donated in 1931, and then a set of lithographs by one of Eleanor's friends, Edward Buck Shiwitz, of the San Antonio Missions. And one of my favorite pieces, because of the story it tells, is Mary Bonner's Map of the World. And anybody who's come with me on one of our behind-the-scenes tours, one of the reasons why I absolutely love this piece by Mary Bonner is it's in response to what was happening in world events. She completed this painting, this etching rather, in 1926, shortly after the discovery of the murals in Crete. And this is actually inspired by those murals. If you're familiar with them, there's a wonderful scene of a youth vaulting over a bull. And Mary Bonner translates this into a Texas scene. But the reason why it's called Map of the World is a little bit more obscure. If you look closely in the background of the painting, what had been damage to the mural over time that modeled the background, she turned into a map of the world. And if you look closely, you'll see South America, you'll come up, you can see France and Spain. And she gives it purpose, but it's a hidden little detail right in the back. But probably one of the most important things is this is the first time that she uses a frieze around her work. And this is a copy of the frieze that was on the mural in Crete. And in subsequent work, she replaces this with Texas themes. And so it's a nice hallmark in her work and a wonderful piece in our collection that was donated by Ethel Drought to her good friend Eleanor Onderdonk. Now, it's important to note that Eleanor did not do all of this alone. While she gets a lot of credit, the San Antonio Art League was working with her hand in hand. And she also had dedicated fellow employees like Robert Wynn, who worked with her for many years. And in her later years of her career, Wynn took over the hanging of the exhibitions under Eleanor's watchful eyes. Unfortunately, in 1957, word got out that Eleanor was reaching retirement age, and the city had a mandatory retirement at the age of 74. She was not very happy about this. On May 4th, 1958, Eleanor officially retired from the Witte Museum, and we celebrated Eleanor Onderdonk Day here in our galleries. It was filled with friends and family, people who had loved her through the years and whose lives she had touched, whose career she had encouraged. A gallery was also opened in her name. Eleanor believed that the people of San Antonio deserved the same opportunity to view great art as the people in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. She provided opportunities for young and up-and-coming artists to display their work in museums, and she built a remarkable collection. In addition to being a talented artist in her own right, Eleanor has left an indelible mark on Texas art as we know it. And as I wrap up my presentation, a little early, I would like to thank Martha Utterback, who was Eleanor's successor, and thank her for answering my questions and for her lovely and incredible knowledge of the Witte's history and of Miss Eleanor. So thank you so much for being so patient with me all these years. I would also like to thank Lyke Cummins, who shared a wonderful story. Many times he's told me little anecdotes about growing up. Mrs. Quillen lived behind their house, and he was a frequent visitor at the Witte Museum. But yesterday he was sharing what happened when he called Miss Onderdonk, Miss Onderdonky. So if you'd like to know what happened, go and find Lyke. So I would like to thank you, but if you have any questions about Eleanor or our collection, I would be happy to answer.
I have a question. How do you find the Diego Rivera that was lost?
Whoops. This one's not a wireless. Okay. So we don't know how they found the Diego Riveras. We do know that the customs officials were part of the search. Unfortunately, the newspaper tells us that they were lost, that they were looking for them, and the next thing we have mention of is that the show is opening at the Witte in November. So. And this is an exhibit that had always sort of tantalized me because I would go through the notes and there was this wonderful little list of the exhibitions that Eleanor worked in her first year at the museum. And it would repeatedly say Diego Rivera show. And so I started digging around trying to find out, what could this Rivera show be? We even contacted the Rivera Foundation and they did not know anything about this. It's like, well, to our knowledge, he didn't ever have an exhibition in Texas, and if you find something, good luck, let us know. And so finding these newspaper articles is our first clues, and hopefully we may learn a little bit more. I'm very curious to see if this might be related to another show that showed later in New York of approximately the same size, though there's no record of when that exhibit was assembled. When they talk about it being shown in New York, they talk about it as if it was the first time. So we're not quite sure. They may or may not have been related, but my best guess is that Emily Edwards was also very involved. She was a member of the San Antonio Art League, and having spent a year down there, would have been the eyes and ears on the ground of what works would have been appropriate to show. Any other questions?
You mentioned Ethel Ralph donated a thing.
She did. She actually donated the Mary Bonner, among many other things, to the museum. She was a longtime supporter of the museum. When the Witte Museum opened, there were 3 key organizations that shared a roof. There was the San Antonio Museum Association, which had been formed in 1923 with the purchase of the H.P. Atwater collection. This was a natural history collection. There was the San Antonio Art League, which was formed in 1912. And then there was the San Antonio Conservation Society that was opened in 1924. So each of these associations sort of had their own sphere of influence. The city hired the employees, but the organizations were the ones who guided the exhibitions. And so Ethel Drought was very involved in those very early years of the art exhibitions here at the Witte. She had a remarkable collection during the lean years of the Depression when we didn't have a lot of money to bring in exhibitions. Local club women like Ethel Drought, Marion McNay, who was at this time Marion Atkinson, also displaying at the Witte. They were looking for all the resources to keep the galleries full. Any other questions?
So once she started working at the Witte, did she continue to paint at all on her own?
She does. There's one note in her diaries that museum employees had been cut to part-time during the Depression, and even then getting your paycheck wasn't a guarantee. For the first time, the museum was charging admission, which we had to get approved by the city of San Antonio. We had been free prior to this, and our galleries were open to everyone. They charged 10 cents. They also had the opening of the reptile garden, which was very, very popular. It seemed like people wanted to see more of the snakes than they did of the art, and that was 10 cents admission as well. But while she was working on half-time, Eleanor does talk about going back and painting. We know that she did some miniatures, but she seemed to have done more landscapes during this time period, though not a lot of her work is out there, so it's difficult for us to say what the volume was that she created during this time. Well, I will say that at 12 o'clock and at 12:30, we will be doing behind-the-scenes tours in the Witte collection across the street in our B. Naylor Morton Research and Collection Center. I know some of you have taken advantage of this opportunity to see the collection that Eleanor helped build over the years, but it's always lovely to get to go behind closed doors and see a collection. So I invite you to join me after the talks are through and before you head over to the Vote auction house. Thank you.